Okay. So welcome back. I'm happy to be with you all again. Thank you for being here and for choosing me over the president, at least for now. But I'm happy to see all of you back, and I'm glad that we can be learning together again tonight. So tonight we're going to explore a very complicated relationship between two women. I wish that it was, a more positive, loving, nurturing relationship. We don't get to see two women interacting with each other that often in the Bible. When we do, we wish that it was, all kind of roses and pretty and beautiful, whatever. But tonight is not going to be like that. But it does lend itself to some very interesting stories and things to think about. I want us to be able to explore. So we're talking about the relationship between Sarah and Hagar. And I want us to be able to explore their motivations. I want us to think about their circumstances in life, where they're coming from, how that informs the decisions that they make and the way that they react to things that are going on around them. And I also want us to just take a minute to recognize that while last week we looked at Sarah and we got to know her and we saw some of her most wonderful characteristics and traits, we see how our commentators, our rabbis really try to show her in the most positive of light and figure out how they can interpret the things that we have in the Bible to make sure that she's always coming out pure and, kind of in the right. Today, we're going to look at some of her flaws. We're going to look at both of them as flawed characters, but really focusing on Sarah because she's the subject of these classes. And I think when we see tonight's more emotional, more nuanced Sarah, I think, at least in my opinion, what I found in studying these stories is we find a more real, raw, and relatable Sarah. We might not think that everything she does is admirable, but I think that we might be able to identify with the motivations behind a lot of it. So let me pull up my my presentation, and while we're doing that, if anybody would like to kind of tell me, what do we know about Hagar and Sarah, about their relationship with each other? And Susie, if you can just, if anyone's raising their hand, if you don't mind calling on them for a second, because I'm just getting this pulled up, that would be wonderful.
Will do.
So last week, a number of you had really wonderful insights about Sarah. You knew a lot about her even before we studied her. So what do we know about the relationship between Hagar and Sarah? Mark.
I don't know much of anything about the relationship, except I think I remember learning that Hagar sort of mocked Sarah and teased her for not having a child, or made her feel lesser because of that. That's about the only thing I really remember in terms of an interaction.
Yep, we're definitely going to explore
not insignificant.
that. Great, thank you.
I think Gilda also had her hand up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
On the one hand, Hagar belittled Sarah, and Sarah was very jealous. On the other hand, Sarah encouraged Hagar to create, to have relations, to have a child. So it was a very push and pull relationship.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. That is a wonderful segue into where we're going to begin. So just for some context in terms of the story and where we find ourselves. So in chronological order, Sarah and Abraham have just left Egypt, and we studied that story last week where Abraham asks Sarah to say that she's his sister. So we looked at that last week. So that's the last time that we've kind of seen them. Some other stuff has happened. We're picking up here with Sarah 10 years later. Okay, and we're going to look at the text. We are going to look at 6 verses of the text very, very closely. It's a very action-packed sequence, and we're really going to take it apart and try to understand what we're seeing here. So the first 4 verses that we're going to be looking at read, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, 'Seeing as the Lord has kept me from having a child, go to my handmaid. Maybe I will have a son and be built up through her.' And Abram heeded Sarai's voice. 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took her handmaid Hagar, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. He came to Hagar and she became pregnant. And when she saw she has become pregnant, her mistress became for her an object of scorn." So I want you to take a minute to just look at this text. And then if I can have 2 volunteers, that would be wonderful. And what I would like you to do is if one person could just kind of restate what we just read from Sarah's perspective, and if the other person can restate it from Hagar's perspective, let's just make sure that we're wrapping our head around what happens in these 4 verses according to each of these women. So who would like to do it from Sarah's perspective? Okay, Sandy?
Sarah's, sad that she can't give her husband a child, and she's nice enough to let him have a child with her handmaid. She's being, she cares enough about him and about him having a child to let him have a child with her handmaid.
Great. Thank you. And now from Hagar's perspective. I can't see everybody, so I'm just going to scroll through for a minute. Susie, help me out if I'm missing anybody because I have my screen shared.
Might help if I take myself off mute. I think Mark has his hand raised, as well as Natalie.
So let's have Natalie do it because we haven't heard from her yet. Natalie, can you tell us how you read this story from Hagar's perspective? All right, maybe she wasn't really raising her hand. Anybody else want to tell it from Hagar's perspective?
Mark said he forgot to unraise his hand, so he's not currently raising his hand.
Oh, okay. Cynthia.
Shani, if you want to go, please go. You put your hand up.
Oh, I don't mind.
Are you sure?
All right.
Yeah, please go. You go.
Okay. So from Hagar's perspective, she's the handmaid, and she, for some reason, gets selected by her boss, Sarah, to become part of her husband's life. Whether she wanted that or not, we don't know. But it basically is saying that at some point, when she does become pregnant, whatever her attitude was before, and I kind of, imagine what that might be, now she sort of feels above Sarah. She just becomes an object of scorn, like, look look now, look at me, So maybe she feels almost victorious now compared to maybe how she felt before, is how I kind of might look at it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for both of those perspectives. I definitely agree with you. I think that's exactly what we're seeing here in the text. But let's look a little bit deeper and really put ourselves in these women's shoes and think about some of the other motivating factors that are going on for them that are really kind of bubbling to the surface in this moment. So if we just look at the two of them separately. So thinking about Sarah, we know that up until this point, Abraham was promised that he would be the father of a great nation 3 times. That's a lot. We also know that Sarah is currently 75 and she has had no children. She is Abraham's wife. She is the one that can fulfill the covenant and ensure that he is going to be the father of a great nation. But it's not happening for them. And it hasn't happened for forever, for a really long time. So Sarah does something that was common practice at the time. She takes one of her servants. She offers that servant to her husband as a wife. And the child that comes from that union will basically serve as though it were Sarah's child. And so she's hoping to be built up, to have the covenant be fulfilled through Hagar's biological child, but basically using Hagar as a surrogate. Now, if we think about Hagar and what's going on for her, Rashi gives us an insight that, for me, really flips what's going on with Hagar on its head and helps me understand it a lot more. So Rashi is commenting on the verse that we just read, which basically is just saying that that Sarah had an Egyptian maid named Hagar. And so Rashi says, she was the daughter of Pharaoh. When Pharaoh saw the miracles which were performed for Sarah that we learned about last week, so the miracle where everybody in Pharaoh's house was afflicted with some sort of plague on behalf of Sarah. We talked about that. Then he let everybody go. He said, better that my daughter should be a maidservant in this household, so Abraham and Sarah's household, and not the main wife in another household. So we're talking here about a princess, right? The daughter of Pharaoh, who goes from being, like royalty to being a servant to a nomadic family because her father was impressed by something that happened on Sarah's behalf, was scared by it, I don't know. And so he gives her away to be a servant. She's living her life for 10 years as a servant. All of a sudden, and we don't know, the text doesn't give us any insight of if this was something she wanted or if this was something she was forced to do. We assume that she was forced to do it, be Abraham's new wife because this was just common practice at the time. But she sees a chance for herself because she's pregnant now with the master's child. And so she starts looking down upon her mistress, upon Sarah. So I think that gives a little bit of kind of context and perspective when we're thinking about these two women and what they're going through at the moment. Very different, but very real emotions. So I want us to explore now, what does it mean that Sarah became an object of scorn in Hagar's eyes? Let's look at that closely. So Rashi says, Hagar brazenly boasted to the ladies, since so many years have passed without Sarai having children, she cannot be as righteous as she seems, but I conceived immediately. So Hagar is using her pregnancy as a reflection of her character, and Sarah's barrenness as a reflection of Sarah's character. And she is spreading this sentiment amongst all the women of their tribe, the women that they're, traveling with. And she's also using her pregnancy to justify why she should not be a servant, right? We see that in this next Tamar Kadari thing. Hagar is described not only as one who acted disrespectfully to her mistress, but as one who caused other noble women to denigrate Sarah. Hagar takes advantage of her pregnancy to besmirch her mistress's good name and assert herself as Sarai's equal. So while at first this is, can be a little bit off-putting, who is she to be making these claims, to be attacking Sarah's character, to be doing so in a public way, to be embarrassing Sarah, who is the leader of this group of people, who has probably found these people, spread the word of God, the idea of monotheism, has been traveling with them. She is 100% their leader. And all of a sudden this servant comes and starts trash talking her, basically. But we can also understand, if we just look at Hagar and her position and her life, why she might want to take advantage of her current situation. She was powerless as a servant. She was powerless as the daughter of Pharaoh when she was sent from her home to become a servant. She was also powerless when Sarah sent her to be with Abraham. All of a sudden, the tables have turned and her circumstances have put her in a position where she might hold some different cards. She might be a little bit more powerful. And whether or not it's okay that she started talking to Sarah like this, started talking to the women in their tribe about this, we can understand why she might feel like she needs to take advantage of the situation that she's in.
So
But
Talia, there's a couple questions and comments. I don't know if we want to get to you right before you start again.
Yeah, I do.
So Ellen is asking, how could Hagar be a princess and still a servant? I'm thinking that Hagar may have thought that her station would be elevated having a child with Abram. Maybe Sarai thought twice about it, but she continues and says, as we well know, women can be quite cruel to one another.
Yeah. So Hagar,
and I believe Shani has a question as well after.
Great, definitely, thank you. So just to clarify, Ellen, when she was a princess before she was given to Sarah and Abraham as a servant. She was a princess when she was living in Egypt in her father's home. And then her father gave her to Abraham and Sarah to be a servant in their household. And yes, for sure, women can be quite cruel to one another. I think we're seeing that here. Shani, did you have a
No, my
question or comment?
Down before from the last time I raised it. So I
Okay.
User error. Ha.
And I just see Bethany's, maybe Hagar is resentful that she was basically made into an incubator and was going to have her baby taken away. Yeah, I mean, I would be. It was against her will, and we can see her reacting to that here. All of it, all of it was against her will. Mark.
Hi, it's Michelle.
Oh, hi, Michelle.
So actually, I was thinking along the same lines, but even harsher. And this is going to sound really terrible, but I've never actually considered. No, I've never really actually considered this. That, and God, forgive the expression, but it's almost. I mean, I guess from Hagar's perspective, she almost was pimped out by Sarai. I know. Sorry. By Sarai to Abraham. Like if she had no control, I mean, you could look at Sarai as an agent of rape, if you will. I mean, I know the laws were different and the rules were different, but again, you know, and I'm sorry for the harsh language, but that's just.
I agree with you. I think you're 100% correct. I mean, it just helps us to see where she might be coming from even more so if we think about it in those terms, especially if we're taking Rashi's perspective and thinking that she, you know, is a princess by birth and is finding herself in this position, and it just keeps getting worse for her. You know, she
regardless of your station in life, to, you know, whether you're a princess or whatever. I mean, she's been established in this household for a while, but to then again be victimized, if you will, and wow, like this is again not a position I've looked at before, so I'm speaking first and filtering second. But yeah. I don't know that her station as a princess, I mean, I guess that would make it all the more dramatic, but in any regard, doesn't matter who you are.
Right. 100%. And there is so much out there written about Hagar and her status and what happens to her in her life. We're not focusing on that tonight. But literally, like, the relationship between these two women could be a semester's long course. I mean, there's just so much here. And, you know, we just can't, we're really just kind of scratching the surface. But yeah, there are so many big themes and big ideas that we could explore between what's happening with these women. Gilda.
Now, I was just going to say, though, we have to be careful not to judge what we're reading by our standards today, because this was a very common thing to happen. That's not to say that she wouldn't be resentful of being a princess and then being a handmaid. Not to say that, you know, she wouldn't want to say, ha, I got pregnant and you didn't. I got the man, you know. But on the other hand, we are dealing with a different mindset today than then. I mean, it was common for the man to have more wives. It was common for one of those wives to be the handmaiden from his first wife or whatever, you know. So I don't know how much of that pimping part, you know, was really there, because that was more of an accepted kind of a thing to do.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. But I think that we also can take the opportunity to think about how these people felt about what was happening to them, even if it was common practice, because that helps us just to understand what we're given in the text. You know, because we're given so little, you know, when it takes the time to say something like she became an object of scorn, then we get to look at that. And then that means that we get to interpret it however we want. And we get to kind of take where we are in life and in time and in the world and think about the Torah through that lens. So I think both are important, and we need to hold both at the same time to be able to study Torah. Thank you. So let's continue. Okay, so I now want to just think about what Sarah's reaction is to Hagar regarding her this way, or talking about her like this, or treating her like this, however we want to think of it. So we'll look at verse 5. And Sarai said unto Abraham, my wrong is on your head. I put my handmaid in your arms. No sooner did she see that she was pregnant, I became for her an object of scorn. Let the Lord judge between us. So this to me seems like an interesting reaction. Why does she go to Abraham first? You know, why doesn't she go to Hagar? has power over Hagar. She could confront her immediately and kind of nip it in the bud. She could take care of it. But instead, she goes to Abraham. And then also the language here is interesting. Why is the wrong on his head? He only did what she asked him to do. She literally brought Hagar to him and followed her orders. And then lastly, for her to say, let the Lord judge between us. What does that even mean? You know, what is she talking about? To me, kind of this whole reaction, this whole, all of this verse confused me. So I want to look at two sources that I think kind of unpack it a little bit. So the Tikva Freimer-Kensky, she says, her own experience of servitude in Egypt, perhaps, has made her feel threatened by the Egyptian Hagar rather than sympathetic to her. Her status as first wife is not invulnerable. She has been given away before in the wife-sister ruse, and she may now be vulnerable to Hagar, who conceives and will bear Abraham's heir. So she's saying here that what's happening with Hagar is bringing up some old trauma for Sarah, right? She's realizing, listen, I thought that I was the head of this clan. I thought that I was secure in my marriage, in my life, but I'm not. You know, just 10 years ago, my husband was willing to give me up, to give me to another man to save his own life. Here, if he can fulfill the covenant with somebody else, who's to say that he won't do that and replace me? Because at this point in the story, we don't yet know that from God, we don't have that, that hasn't happened, that Abraham is told that the covenant will be fulfilled through Sarah. So at this point, we don't know that. We don't have that assurance. So Sarah's role is vulnerable. And here is this woman who is now pregnant, is now carrying the heir inside of her, while Sarah is not able to do that. So what if she's not needed? What if she's not necessary? Her position is being threatened by something that she has no control over. She can't control her ability to conceive. And all of a sudden, it's really being kind of thrown in her face that someone else has done her job. And then Rabbi Amy Sapowith says, let Adonai judge between you and me, says Sarai. Is she asking God to judge whom Hagar should serve, her or Abraham? For what is it that Sarah and Abraham share that Sarah is putting up for judgment? Is it Hagar? Or more likely, is it the covenant? So here we see that the covenant is really the root of the threat for Sarah. But again, if we think about her, if we think about what she has been through, she gave up her life, her family, her home to follow Abraham, to follow this man that she loves, that she believes in. She believes in his mission. She believes in his purpose. And they together were supposed to be the parents of this great nation. But it's just not happening for her. And so what if the covenant is now fulfilled through somebody else, which seems like might be happening? And also the person who looks like is going to be fulfilling the covenant is now kind of putting her down for Sarah's not being able to do so, which was not at all part of the plan. Daphne, I see your hands up.
I was also thinking, I wonder if this also, one of the other factors that could make Sarai insecure and feel maybe threatened by that relationship is maybe she's also questioning God's role. She clearly had been praying and hoping to be able to be the one who is pregnant and is able to fulfill that covenant through, yes, through her, but with God's help. And all of a sudden, she's been struggling year after year after year. And now here comes Sarai, here comes Hagar, and she gets pregnant right away. And I think then it's like, wait, whose side is God on?
Right.
God is supposed to be helping me. And maybe she also didn't realize how quickly Hagar could get pregnant. And so I think it probably just makes her question everything. Is God, who's maybe supposed to be protecting and helping her and guiding her in her relationship, all of a sudden, I think it just makes her question everything.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I'm just going back to what we looked at a couple of minutes ago. In verse 2, it says, and Sarai said to Abram, seeing as the Lord has kept me from having a child. So that's exactly what you're saying. She's really looking at this as there is, divine intervention in the act of even just becoming pregnant. And also, if we take the commentary that Hagar is talking about, how she's putting values on it. She's not as righteous as she says she is because she's not getting pregnant. And here, look at me, I got pregnant right away. What does that say about me? You could see how all of that would cause Sarah to question, everything about her life and the choices that she's made and where she is. Thank you. Gilda, is your hand raised from now or from before? Okay. All right, anybody else have any comments on what we just read? Okay, so let's continue. Okay. So I think the question is now, what is Sarah going to do, right? She has this experience with Hagar. She has all these big feelings. She is feeling threatened. She confronts Abraham. What is her next step? And so in verse 6, it says, so Abraham said to Sarai, look, your handmaid is in your hands. Do to her as you please. Sarai then so afflicted her that she ran away. So just to take like a quick aside and just look at Abraham for 1 second, because I feel like I have to mention this. What I think is so interesting in this verse is that Abraham is part of this struggle too. He is supposed to be the person that is the father of this nation. And here there is his child, right? It happened. Somebody is pregnant with his child, with the heir to the covenant. And he says, okay, you're upset, Sarah. You do what you need to do. And that ends up with her, doing whatever she does to Hagar. It's so bad that Hagar runs away. Abraham, for all intents and purposes, at this point in the story, just lost that child that he has been waiting for 85 years, because he's older. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's astounding. And this goes back to what we had talked about last week, where we said that Sarah was more prophetic than Abraham. And there's this text in the Bible that says that God said to Abraham that he should do whatever Sarah says. So we're kind of seeing that in action here, but still, I just think it's astounding and I wanted to mention it. So I want us just to think about, like, what is the nature of this affliction? What did she do to Hagar that was so bad that Hagar, pregnant, alone, leaves her family, this family that she's traveling with, this group of people, to basically go out into the desert. They are a nomadic tribe wandering the desert. It's not like she's just going to go, to another city or to another safe place. For her to leave this group of people is to put herself in a very, very vulnerable position. So what happened? So Rabbi R.A. Levin says, Sarah actually treated Hagar no differently than she had treated her up to that time. However, now that Hagar had become pregnant and perceived herself as Abraham's true wife, the simplest request that Sarah made of Hagar was considered by Hagar to be oppressive. So we see here that Hagar is claiming some of her power, right? Nothing's changed in their relationship. Hagar has changed. She feels differently about herself. She feels differently about Sarah. She feels differently about her station and her place in life. She's not going to take it anymore. She doesn't want to be a servant anymore. So anytime Sarah would say anything or ask anything, Hagar just wasn't hearing it. It wasn't going to happen anymore, to the point where she left. Ramban, on the other hand, Nachmanides, has a very, very different take. And he says that our mother Sarah sinned. As a result, Hagar's descendants would persecute the children of Abraham and Sarah. So basically, Nachmanides is saying that whatever Sarah did was so bad that basically we're still paying for it today. So the affliction, he doesn't define what the affliction was, but he's saying that it happened and it was bad, and we are still suffering, and we will be suffering from that forever, basically. So these are two very different takes on the same thing. And we don't know, obviously, which one is real or right or true, but what kind of rings true to you? I mean, putting yourselves in these women's shoes, knowing what we know from them so far, do either of these kind of feel like, that's probably what it was, or this makes more sense to me in the context of the story or in the context of these women? Bonnie.
So what I've been thinking about as you're talking is in the beginning when Sarai went to Abraham and also to Hagar, she was thinking with her head about how to solve the problem of not having children and thought this was a wonderful solution. But then when Hagar became pregnant so easily, it was sort of like a slap in her face, and all her emotions then came to the forefront. And sort of this, at that point, Hagar's emotions took over also, and she had sort of power and could rub it into Sarai.
100%. I agree with you 100%. It's kind of like, if we think about this, Sarah wanted to control the situation, and she thought from the start that she was in control of the situation. She had a problem. She came up with a solution. She suggested that solution, and then she put a plan into action, right? Hagar gets pregnant, and Hagar's actions are a variable that Sarah didn't account for. And, Hagar's feelings change. The way that she's treating Sarah changes. Sarah all of a sudden is losing control of this situation, and she reacts very emotionally, very intensely, and very harshly. And for me, when I think about this, I can't identify with the specifics of this situation, but I can identify with kind of the overall arc of what's going on for Sarah emotionally. When I think I'm in control and then I lose control and it goes badly for me, and that triggers fear, or I feel threatened, or whatever it is, and I react in a way that maybe I'm not proud of. I mean, I've had that experience, and I imagine that a number of us have had that experience as well. So for me, maybe she did something bad and wrong. Maybe she overreacted and it wasn't okay. But the same way that we can understand why Hagar, the way that her reactions might have been natural and might have made sense in a way, I think Sarah's reaction is the same. It rings true to me. Beth, I see your hands up. Beth?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Okay, so I don't know if I agree with either one of the commentaries. I think I have my own perspective on it. And
Let's hear it.
that is that Hagar was a nasty little creature once she realized she had the power of the baby. She kept poking the bear, turning the knife, whatever you want to say. And Sarah, who basically knows that except for this one thing, she's been protected by God or the angels this whole time, almost forgot she was human. And she got a little bit of a God complex about her. And she decided to take matters into her own hands and punish the way that God would punish. And the problem was that she was human and she didn't take that into consideration. There's no mention of feelings in it because feelings at that point aren't important. She just knows right and wrong, punish, not punish. And she didn't take any femininity into her actions whatsoever. She wasn't ready to be a mother then because she didn't see a third viewpoint.
I love that, what you said at the end.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
Bethany just posted a comment as well.
Yeah, Hagar has been powerless her whole life, used for other people's needs, and maybe her running away was her trying to take back her self-worth. I see that too. I mean, if we're talking about power and agency, that's what these women are, to me, that's what they're fighting for. Maybe not in the best way, but that's what they're fighting for. This next text, I think, is really kind of beautiful when we're thinking about these women, in the time that they're living in and the circumstances that are kind of happening to them. So Nechama Leibowitz says, Sarah's wrong is compounded when considering the following. While in Egypt with Abraham, Sarah was afflicted by Pharaoh, the master of the land. She barely escapes. Instead of learning from her oppressor never to oppress others, she did the opposite, persecuting Hagar, causing her to flee. Having herself been victimized, Sarah should have been more sensitive. Hence, whatever her rationale, her retaliation was inappropriate. The message is clear. Victims of oppression should reject rather than incorporate their oppressor's ways. Love the stranger, the Torah exhorts over and over, for you too were strangers in Egypt. So I would love to hear your reactions to this. Because both of these women suffered abuse at the hands of people that were more powerful than them. Sarah was abused first by her husband, by his kind of abandoning her, giving her over to another man to save his life, his own life. And then she does the same thing. She abuses Hagar, giving her away to a man, wasn't her against her will. Maybe that was something that happened at the time, but theoretically, maybe she should have been a bit more sensitive because she had lived through it. And here she turns around and she does the exact same thing to Hagar. I wish these women would kind of band together and protect each other a little bit more. But we don't see that happening in the text. Does anybody have any reaction to this source? That's okay. I just think it's really great food for thought to kind of sit with it and think about it. Oh, Mark, I see your hand is up.
Sorry. So since no one had a comment about this one, I want to go back one step to the last one about Sarah's sin being so great that Hagar's progeny are against the Jewish people. I'm sure this is not where those comments were made, but that seems pretty radical. And it strikes me that Sarah's sin could be considered having gotten Hagar in this whole mix. If Sarah had just said, I'm not fertile, but God said my husband's going to be a great nation, if she had just trusted in God, Hagar wouldn't have been in the picture. That seems a bigger sin to me, that she introduced Hagar into this situation and caused this whole problem, than just trusting God would make her eventually have a child because she's with Abraham.
Interesting.
Only because the one with Hagar, it seems whatever she did to Hagar and the baby, or pregnant Hagar, given that they didn't die, I'm not saying it couldn't be terrible, but to basically condemn our whole race for eternity, it's hard to imagine what could have been that bad, given that they didn't die. She didn't kill them. So in that context, I'm wondering, and I'm sure these comments were made regarding the part of the story you're covering, but it seems like that's the bigger sin of Sarah's is not trusting in God, and therefore bringing Hagar into the situation is the sin, if you will.
Interesting. I like that take. Beth, I see your hand is up, but I don't know if that was from before or from now.
That was from before. Sorry, I'll lower it.
It's okay. All right. I love everything that you all are saying. So let's continue. So just to kind of sum up this piece of text that we've just spent a bunch of time on, I just want us to look at this last source by Amy Sapowith, who says, by the time Sarai suggests that Hagar marry Abram, Hagar has been with Sarai at least 10 years. We don't know the precise nature of their relationship. Up until that moment, their relationship could have been formal, Sarai in her world of relative privilege and Hagar in hers of relative poverty. But if their relationship included a genuine attachment, Hagar's insight may have felt like a deeply personal betrayal. So I just think this makes it so much more tragic, because they lived together side by side for 10 years. And yes, we don't know the nature of their relationship. Maybe it really was just kind of master servant. But what if it was more than that? What if it was more like a mother-daughter type of thing? And they spent this time like really forming an attachment. And then all of a sudden it just comes crumbling down in a mixture of really big feelings that we can understand where they're coming from. We can understand kind of the pain and the yearning to grow that these women both have. And that really destroyed something that could have been, or maybe was, wonderful and positive in their lives. And, this just kind of goes back to what we were saying in the beginning about how we don't see many women interacting with each other in the Bible. And when we do, we wish we saw it a little bit differently. And what if this story was different? What if it was more supportive? What if this relationship helped each of these women through hard times in their lives? We probably wouldn't know about it if that was the case. But I just think, really calling to the forefront that they lived together, traveled together, worked together for 10 years, just really made me look at this differently. And it's so intense and it's so raw, and they have so much history and they share so much. And it's just so sad to see this happening with them. And it's not over. So we're going to fast forward in time a little bit. So Hagar does flee, right? And she goes into the desert, but God tells her to return to her master's house, which isn't great news for her. But at the same time, she's also told that she is going to be the mother of a great nation through the child that she is carrying, who is Ishmael. So the next time we see these women together is 13 years later. In this time, Ishmael is born and grows up. We find out that Sarah is going to be the one to fulfill the covenant, And also Isaac is born. So we pick up 13 years later at Isaac's weaning ceremony when he is around 3 years old. Okay. I included the Hebrew here because there are some really interesting things that are going on in the text that we're going to look at closely. So first we'll read the English. And the child grew, they're talking about Isaac, and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, making merry. And Sarah said to Abraham, drive out this slave and her son, for the son of this slave shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac. So first, let's just set the stage for a minute. So a weaning ceremony. This was something that also was kind of commonplace at the time and would happen at around 3 years old. And basically they were celebrating because if a child made it to that age, they were kind of out of the woods in, thinking about like the high rates of infant mortality at the time. And if they survived till around 3 years old, the chances were so much more increased that the child would live to adulthood. So this was a time when they would celebrate. Okay, so that Isaac had made it through his most vulnerable years. And now let's look at the text and let's look at some things in the text that are real clues to us of what's going on for Sarah and just the text in general. So we are familiar with Ishmael, okay? First of all, God names him. We hear about God's promise to Hagar that Ishmael will be the father of a great nation. We also hear about Ishmael directly when Abraham is circumcising himself and Ishmael and all of the men. But all of a sudden here, there is no Ishmael. There is only the son of the slave, the son of Hagar. His name is gone. His name is not in this story at all. The other change that's very interesting is that up until this point, when we're talking about Hagar, she's referred to as Shifcha, which means handmaiden. Here, she's referred to as Amah, which means slave. So what do we think these changes are kind of signifying to us in the text? Any ideas? What are we taking away from them, from Hagar and from Ishmael, in the way that we're speaking about them here? Gilda.
I wasn't going exactly that way. I was thinking about the relationship of Sarah and Hagar. Definitely now, we said they lived together for when there might have been happy times or okay times between them, asking for opinions of each other, whatever. You definitely now is like, you just work for me.
Right.
Just do the stuff I want you to do. And presumably Sarai has picked things that are not as delicate as what she had before as a handmaiden. Mm-hmm. Picking out her clothes or what. I'm just making this up. But, as opposed to, during the doing dirt, down and dirty kind of stuff as a slave would.
So her actual role has changed, Hagar.
Right.
Yeah, for sure, that could be. Meet just says, I don't know which one of you.
In your text, the word slave and all that was in Sarah's words. So I was just thinking, when Hagar was pregnant, it was offensive to Sarah, it was hurtful. But now that she's talking about her child, it's a threat. And so she's ramping it up. It's not just about her, but it's about her child's future and all that. And suddenly now she's really pulling her claws out because she's protecting her child and his legacy.
Yeah, 100%. I think both of those things, both of your answers are very kind of on point. Anybody else? So, yeah, Sandy.
Calling her a slave rather than a handmaid and just calling him the son rather than having a name is making them feel more, making them seem more worth less than they were before.
Yeah, for sure. They're definitely, the way that the text is viewing them has changed. And Beth, it took their humanity away. Isaac is now here, and there is no space for Ishmael or his mother. Thank you. So that was kind of the direction that I was going. That's what I had seen in here. Is that, you know, it's not a coincidence that this language is being used at the same time as Isaac is kind of growing out of his most vulnerable years. And maybe up until this point, Ishmael was still there as a contingency plan. You know, if this child that they had waited for, Sarah and Abraham had waited for years and years and years, did not survive, there is another option, right? There is Abraham's firstborn who could fulfill the covenant. But now, maybe we don't need Ishmael anymore. And maybe now the fact that he's here and in their home is posing a threat to Isaac and to what his job is supposed to be. And so Sarah doesn't want that anymore. We don't need the contingency plan. Let's get rid of them. So then the next thing we're going to look at is the word mitzah, which in our text, in our English translation, we defined it as making merry. So the question is, what was Ishmael doing? What was this making merry? What was so bad about it that kind of spurred Sarah to banish him from their home? What was going on here? So let me share my screen again. Okay. We have two texts here. So Jacob Hanakuzi says, since Matriarch Sarah so forcefully demanded the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael, many of the Jewish sages interpreted the play, mitzachek, the play of Ishmael, as very offensive. Some think that Ishmael had a bow and arrows, and he was shooting them at Isaac playfully, which was nevertheless dangerous. Some others think that Ishmael was building altars for gods and was sacrificing grasshoppers at their altars. Some others even suggest that Ishmael was ambushing girls and was raping them. Thus, the play of Ishmael was given idolatrous, murderous, and sexual shades in the later interpretations. So here we're seeing very clearly that, and he's kind of summing it up, but there are a lot of commentators that say things like this, that it wasn't innocent playing. It wasn't just a big brother and a little brother playing together, but Sarah really felt that she needed to protect her son from physical danger that was posed by Ishmael, or at least by very bad influences. But Rabbi Becky Silverstein says, the Bible, playing off the common roots of mitzachek and yitzchak, which we see are basically the same word and it has the same root, notes that this verb may be best translated as Isaacing. Whatever it was that Ishmael was doing, Sarah was threatened by it. And why? Because Ishmael was acting too much like Isaac, playing at being Isaac, threatening to take Isaac's place. By using the verb mitzachek, the Bible blurs Isaac's and Ishmael's identities. It is this blurriness that is the foundation of the threat that ultimately leads to their expulsion. So this is a very, very different take. First, we're talking about protecting Isaac from physical harm or from very negative influences. And then the second one is basically Sarah has to protect Isaac so that he can fulfill the covenant, so that Ishmael cannot maybe claim his right as firstborn or whatever it might be, but try to replace Isaac and be Abraham's heir in this way, the heir to this covenant. So what do you think rings more true? I mean, what do you think is more Sarah at this point? Susie?
They're both so incredibly different.
Yeah.
One is almost like evil, and the other is the blurring. And I'd like to think that it's the second, and that she just doesn't want the two boys intertwined at all, versus the first one, which really goes in a very different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, totally different interpretations here. Sherry?
So it's interesting when you were reading the second one, and even when you were talking about this whole relationship dynamic, the first thing that popped into my head was Asa and, I'm drawing a blank right now, the two brothers.
Yep.
Who were like
Jacob.
fighting for a birthright.
Yeah.
And I kind of, that was like the first thing that popped into my head. I would have never thought of the first one. That just seems like way out of bounds, although, you know, who knows, I'm learning all kinds of things tonight. But I really felt like maybe it was like they were fighting for a birthright, and maybe that's why she was like, you're out of here. Just because you were the firstborn, you're not the true leader or, you know, inheritor.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, for me, the first one is definitely more straightforward. But I think the second one speaks to a lot of the themes that we have been talking about tonight. She just continues to feel so threatened and so insecure. And while her place and her role as Abraham's wife, as the mother of the nation, as the one who will fulfill the covenant, is a blessing and is such a wonderful thing that she gets to have, it also has colored her entire life since then, since this first promise to Abraham. She can't see anything beyond fulfilling this covenant and the pressure that she feels at being able to live up to that. And so the way she treats the women in her life, Hagar, the way she treats her son, the way she relates to Abraham, it's all the way that we've been looking at it tonight. It's all through this lens of, what if I can't fulfill the covenant? What if it's not through me? What if it's somebody else? What if I can't do this, and so then I'm not needed anymore. I'm not important anymore. And to the point where, you know, now she's lived with Hagar for 23 years. She has watched this boy grow up for 13 years, and she just banishes them. She just gets rid of them. And the word that is used, garesh, you know, to banish them, is the same verb that's used in the 10th plague when Pharaoh says, just like, get rid of the Israelites. I want them gone. So it implies the kind of banishment where they are leaving and never coming back. So that's what we're seeing here. It's very harsh language. And I think it just really comes from, you know, her insecurity and this threat that she's just been feeling her whole life, which maybe it's real, maybe it's self-imposed, we don't know, but for her, it is very real.
Sounds like she needed a mental health day.
Cynthia had a great observation, and she wrote in saying that it reminds her in some ways of the concubine world or the kings like Henry VIII, who had multiple children with servants, and the children were not recognized or given the same opportunity. So they were cast offs or cast outs. They were robbed of their birthright.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely, that's a great observation. Interesting parallel there. So we are almost done. I just have, two more thoughts that I wanted to share with you. This by Rabbi Jill Borden is just a very interesting thing to think about, that as Hagar and Ishmael are exiled from Sarah's presence, so too is Sarah exiled from the narrative. What happens to our fierce mama bear after this demand to banish others? We don't know, and we don't hear. She disappears from the story and has no more agency, presence, or voice. This is Sarah's final act. So we can make of that whatever we want, and Sarah is mentioned again in the text, but she's not present in the text. We don't see her again. We don't hear from her again. So maybe her role really was just to secure and fulfill the covenant, and she did that. And so her final act is an act that will allow that to happen. She gets rid of the competition. She did her job, and we don't have to see her again. That's one way we could look at it. But also we could say that her actions were just so unjustified and so bad and just mean that there's no room for her left in the text. We don't know. We can only speculate. We can only think about it. But the fact remains that these stories are in the Torah. They're in the text. And Sarah remains a revered character in our Jewish tradition, despite some of the things that we have learned about tonight, some of her actions that are not the best, are not the most admirable. She is on the whole viewed as a wonderful, wonderful person. And we learn about her hospitality and her gift of prophecy and her belief in God. And we learn about her as kind of the matriarch of our matriarchs. And that's where we hold her. And so these things exist alongside each other. The wonderful qualities that she embodies, and also the flaws that are just part of her. So I want to leave us with this text by Rabbi Avi Weiss, that we can read it in light of Sarah. We can read it in light of anybody that we learn about in the Torah. He says, in most faiths, leaders or prophets are perfect. They can do no wrong, and any criticism of their actions is considered sacrilegious. While strong sentiments within Judaism exist to defend biblical spiritual leaders as perfect, there is, at the same time, an opposite opinion in Jewish thought. It maintains that our greatest biblical personalities, while holy and righteous, were also human and made mistakes. They were real people, not God. It is precisely because our holy, inspirational leaders, including Sarah herself, were so human that we are able to look at them and say that maybe, just maybe, we, in all of our flaws and faults, can strive to be great leaders too. So I think this is just a wonderful way to end, and a wonderful way for us to look at Judaism as a whole. We are lucky to be able to have this tradition that celebrates humanity and doesn't just take people and turn them into these perfect godly figures, but allows us to learn from the good and the bad, because that helps us to relate to these people so much more, so that we can feel closer to them and feel like the lessons that we learn from them are that much more relevant and real and speak to us in that way. Does anybody have any closing comments about this or anything that we've talked about tonight or the past couple of weeks?
I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate the broadened perspective, from someone who's not, I'm not a lifelong Torah scholar, and have studied and seen our literature in a certain way, and this is really, really brought a very different, very engaging perspective, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. And I just want to thank all of you for being here and for learning with me.
Thank you so, so much for this, Talia. I know you've put a lot of time and effort into this, and it's very much appreciated by all of us. In closing, I